And he was the kind of dude that would say something to her.
That's hate. He's hard.
All right, to have you 100% motivated to go at him, and then he would drop 50.
Would tell me that Michael Jordan, who won all the Defensive Player of the Year awards, never got cooked.
There are legends in sports, and then there is Michael Jordan. His name does not just belong in the conversation of greatness, it defines it. Whenever stories surface about him, they are rarely about ordinary games or routine performances. They are about moments when he decided to dominate, moments when his competitive drive became the stuff of basketball folklore. Stephen A. Smith has often been one of the loudest voices reminding us just how unique Jordan's mentality was. In this discussion, we dive into his detailed breakdown of how Michael Jordan could drop 50 points simply to prove a point, and how that mentality set him apart from everyone else who has ever stepped on a basketball court. These are not just highlights of a career. They are glimpses into the mindset of a man who refused to be anything but the best. Make sure you subscribe to NBA Showdown and turn on notifications, because you do not want to miss the stories that bring the game to life the way we do here. Stephen A. Smith begins by painting a vivid picture of the intimidation Michael Jordan carried with him onto the court. This was not a vague kind of intimidation. It was the direct and unshakable fear that Jordan would do exactly what he said he would do. When he decided he was going to drop 50 points on someone, he would go out and make it happen. That is the rare combination of intent and execution that very few athletes in history have possessed. It is one thing to declare dominance before a game, but it is something else entirely to follow through with a performance so overwhelming that it leaves opponents mentally defeated. This was not about random scoring explosions either. It was targeted, calculated, and often personal. The mental warfare began before the first tip-off and extended throughout the game as Jordan systematically dismantled defenses. The message behind Stephen A.'s words is that Jordan's greatness was as much psychological as it was physical. He used fear as a tool, but that fear was not rooted in empty threats. It was rooted in a history of him doing exactly what he promised he would do. Players knew that when he set his mind to dominating them, there was no hiding, no slowing him down, and no way to avoid the humiliation that was coming. This made preparing to face him a nightmare because even before the game began, the outcome often felt inevitable. In the competitive world of professional sports, where athletes pride themselves on confidence, Jordan's ability to shake that confidence before the game even started was an advantage few could match. Stephen A. is essentially telling us that Michael Jordan's legacy is not just about numbers on a stat sheet. It is about how those numbers were achieved and the aura that surrounded every single one of those legendary performances.
Fear that Jordan would instill in you, because he was the kind of person that, like, I'm gonna drop 50 on you tonight, and he would do it.
Stephen A. then highlights a very specific aspect of Michael Jordan's decision-making process when it came to games. According to him, Jordan was not always motivated in the same way every night. The deciding factor often came when he saw the opposing star player he was about to face. That visual confirmation seemed to ignite something in him, almost like flipping a competitive switch. This is important because it shows how personal competition was to Jordan. It was not enough for him to simply go through the motions. He wanted a reason, a challenge, a target to conquer. Once he identified that target, it became a mission. In the high-pressure world of the NBA, stars often prepare mentally for certain matchups. But Jordan took that preparation to a different level by channeling his competitive drive toward individuals. When Stephen A. describes this, it is not just about who Jordan was playing against, it is about how Jordan mentally positioned himself to dominate. He could look across the court, see a player who was getting attention, respect, or hype, and decide in that moment that he was going to completely shut them down or overshadow them. This mindset meant that the better the opponent, the more dangerous Jordan became. It also reveals why his performances in big games, against big names, were so consistently spectacular. He did not shy away from the challenge. He welcomed it as fuel for his competitive fire. In essence, Stephen A. is showing us that for Jordan, basketball was more than a sport. It was a personal battleground where every matchup was a test of pride, skill, and mental toughness, and he refused to lose those battles.
Until he see the star he about to go against with him.
Stephen A. follows up by explaining another tactic Michael Jordan would use, and it is one that demonstrates the lengths he was willing to go to in order to get the best out of himself and his opponents. Jordan was known to make personal comments or criticisms toward players before a game, not necessarily because he truly believed those things, but because he knew it would provoke them. He would say something negative to spark their competitive instincts, all while knowing exactly what he was about to do to them on the court. This was part psychological manipulation and part self-motivation. By creating a personal edge to the matchup, Jordan ensured that the game carried extra intensity for both sides. The brilliance of this tactic was that it forced opponents to play with heightened emotion, which often led to mistakes. Meanwhile, Jordan thrived under that kind of tension, using it to sharpen his own performance. Stephen A. makes it clear that this was not just trash talk for the sake of entertainment. It was strategic. Once the game started, Jordan would execute his plan to perfection, often scoring at will and, as Stephen A. vividly recalls, sometimes putting up 50 points on the very players he had provoked. The takeaway here is that Jordan understood the mental aspect of basketball better than almost anyone. He could manipulate the emotional state of his opponents while keeping his own composure intact, turning their heightened intensity into an advantage for himself. This approach did not just help him win games, it cemented his legacy as a master of both the physical and psychological battles that define greatness in sports.
And he was the kind of dude that would say something to her.
That's hate. He's horrible.
All right, to have you 100% motivated to go at him, and then he would drop 50.
Stephen A. Smith emphasizes that Michael Jordan would do whatever it took to get the most out of his opponents. This was not because he wanted to help them improve for their own sake, but because he wanted to face them at their absolute peak. The logic here is deceptively simple, yet incredibly powerful. If you beat someone when they are at their best, there are no excuses, no doubts, no lingering what-ifs. For Jordan, competition was not about finding the easiest path to victory. It was about proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that he was better. And the only way to do that was to ensure his opponent was fully engaged and motivated. This might mean challenging them in the media, making personal remarks to fire them up, or dominating them early in a game to force them to respond with everything they had. In doing so, Jordan created an environment where every possession mattered and where the energy level was sky high. Stephen A.'s insight reveals that this was one of the reasons Jordan was so revered among peers. Even in defeat, opponents often admitted they saw the best version of themselves because Jordan demanded it. The fascinating part is that this approach not only elevated the opponent, but also elevated Jordan himself. When faced with an opponent who was playing at their peak, Jordan found another gear, another level of performance that most athletes cannot even imagine. He was chasing perfection, and to him, perfection could only be measured against the best version of the competition. This hunger to test himself under the toughest conditions possible is what set Jordan apart, and it is also why his legendary games carry such weight in basketball history.
Telling you, he would do whatever it took to get the most out of you because he wanted you at your best.
Stephen A. continues by sharpening the point. Jordan did not just want his opponents at their best to beat them, he wanted to completely annihilate them. The goal was to demoralize them so thoroughly that they would never again think they could beat him. This is an insight into a competitive mindset that is rare even among elite athletes. For Jordan, winning was not enough. He sought dominance so absolute that it left a psychological scar, ensuring that future matchups would be won in the mind before the ball was even tipped. By dismantling an opponent at their peak, he removed any illusion that they could ever close the gap. This kind of competitive ruthlessness explains the intimidation factor that followed Jordan throughout his career. Opponents often stepped onto the court already second-guessing themselves because they had previously experienced the full force of his dominance. Stephen A.'s description reveals that this was not cruelty for its own sake. It was a calculated strategy to maintain competitive control over his rivals. By stripping away their belief, he ensured that his reign at the top was not just physical, but mental as well. This is why Jordan's rivalries often ended with him holding the decisive edge. He had already broken the opponent's spirit in a prior encounter. The takeaway is that Jordan was not simply competing in games. He was constructing a legacy of psychological supremacy that would define an entire era of basketball.
Wanted you at your best so he could annihilate you and completely demoralize you from ever thinking you could fuck with him again.
Joe Budden introduces an interesting perspective in the conversation by questioning whether Michael Jordan would have been the same player if he had to face some of today's most athletic and skillful opponents. His point challenges the idea of timeless dominance by suggesting that certain modern players might have abilities that go beyond what Jordan ever faced. This sparks a broader discussion about eras in basketball and how comparisons across generations can be both fascinating and flawed. Budden's comment does not diminish Jordan's achievements, but instead invites a thought experiment. What happens when an all-time great faces talents that bring completely new dimensions to the game? The NBA today features players with unprecedented size, speed, shooting range, and versatility. Would Jordan adapt to these challenges the same way he did in his era? The implication here is that greatness is partly a product of context. However, history shows that Jordan thrived on challenge and adaptation, and his mental toughness would likely have prepared him to meet even the most extreme modern obstacles. Stephen A. would likely argue that Jordan's drive and work ethic were so unmatched that he would have evolved his game to dominate in any era. Budden's statement adds depth to the discussion by reminding us that while legends are defined by what they did, it is also worth exploring how they might fare under different circumstances. And for Jordan, that question is part of what keeps his myth alive.
Jordan is Jordan if you have to face some of these people that actually can do some of this stuff that is beyond our belief.
Joe Budden caps the discussion with a statement that challenges one of the most common assumptions about Michael Jordan's career, that he was invincible on the defensive end. He points out that Jordan, despite his Defensive Player of the Year honors and reputation as a lockdown defender, must have had moments where he got cooked. This is not meant as disrespect, but as a reminder that no player is perfect. Even the greatest have moments where they are beaten. The importance of this perspective lies in its humanizing effect. By acknowledging that Jordan faced challenges on defense, it reinforces just how remarkable his overall dominance was. If even the best have off moments, then the measure of greatness is not in being flawless, but in consistently recovering and coming out on top. Budden's observation pushes back against the myth of absolute perfection, suggesting that Jordan's true greatness lay in his resilience, his ability to bounce back from adversity, and his refusal to let mistakes define him. It also reminds fans that the game of basketball is about matchups, and even an elite defender can be put in difficult situations against the right opponent. What set Jordan apart was that those moments were rare, and when they happened, they became fuel for him to shut down his opponent the next time. This final quote ties the conversation back to the theme of relentless competitiveness, showing that Jordan's mindset never allowed a setback to linger for long.
Would tell me that Michael Jordan, who won all the Defensive Player of the Year awards, never got cooked.
When you step back and look at all these accounts, a picture emerges of Michael Jordan that goes beyond statistics, championships, or highlight reels. Stephen A. Smith and Joe Budden are describing a man whose competitive spirit was unmatched, whose psychological strategies were as deadly as his physical skills, and whose dominance was both immediate and lasting. Jordan was a master of motivation, capable of bringing out the best in his opponents only to crush them at their peak, leaving a permanent mark on their confidence. He thrived on personal challenges, used every tool at his disposal to gain an edge, and created an aura of inevitability around his success. Even when critics question how he would fare against different eras or acknowledge that he was not perfect, the conclusion remains the same. Jordan's greatness was rooted in his ability to rise to any occasion and to leave no doubt about who the best player on the court was. Michael Jordan will always be at the top, and nothing can beat that.